The focus of this lecture is absolutism in Central and Eastern Europe to 1740. In this short lecture, we focus on the Eastern European country, Russia. For 300 years of its history, from 1242 until 1556, Russia was not a free country. In fact, it was not governed by Russians at all. From 1242 to 1556, Russia was part of the Mongol Empire. The Mongols from Mongolia, that is to say an area north of China, were nomadic people unified by a great leader given the title Khan. This Khan was Genghis or Chinggis Khan, 1162 to 1227. Genghis or Chinggis Khan unified the nomadic people called the Mongols from Mongolia, and then, in the name of conquest, went out and took over vast amounts of territory, including China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Russia. Russia was a part of the Mongol Empire from 1242 to 1556. The Khans in this period were extremely brutal in their treatment of populations. Most of the time, they ordered the slaughter of entire populations. They ordered cities be burned to the ground. But yet at the same time, they would often choose a particular group of men from this conquered area, wherever it may be, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Russia. They would choose a group of men to act as their administrators, their day-to-day governors of their vast territories. While the Khans required tribute, slaves, loyalty from their conquered areas, they themselves did not want to be bothered with the day-to-day governing and management of such a vast empire. Therefore, they relied on native men in their empire to govern these areas themselves. So in Russia, a particular group of Russian men were selected to aid the Khan to govern and oversee Russia on his behalf. One group was selected by the Khans as their second in command in Russia. These were a group of boyars, and remember, boyar means Russian noble. This group of boyars was from Moscow and are just simply commonly referred to as the Muscovite princes. So from 1242 to 1556, the Khan was number one in command in Russia. He's the number one man in charge. Second to him in command and power is the Muscovite prince. This situation worked from 1242 until 1505 without question. But between 1462 and 1505, that is to say the reign of Ivan III as the Muscovite prince, the situation began to change a little. Ivan III did not want to be simply the Muscovite prince. He desired a more glamorous title for himself. The title he selected was Tsar, which can be spelled C-Z-A-R, C-S-A-R, T-S-A-R, T-Z-A-R. This is the Russian word for Caesar. No matter how it's spelled, it means Caesar. Ivan III took for himself the title of Caesar, and that should bring to mind Julius Caesar and his descendants in the Roman Empire. Julius Caesar and his descendants were absolute dictatorial leaders. So by choosing the title Caesar for himself, Ivan III was saying that he aspired to be an absolutist dictatorial leader. This may be a slight exaggeration on his part because he's still only second in command to the Mongol Khan and has his power and prestige only so long as he stays on the good side of the Khan. Yet we mention Ivan III taking the title of Tsar because it is important. Ivan III reigns as the first Tsar of Russia, but this is a title that all successive Russian leaders will use, at least until 1917. So this is a title that will be popular for a very long time. If you look at this, we're talking about 1462 to 1505 is when the term Tsar comes into use for the first time in Russia. It will be used until 1917. That's over 200 years. Ivan III was succeeded by a Muscovite prince, who was succeeded by another Muscovite prince. This Muscovite prince that we look at next is Ivan IV, who reigned from 1533 to 1584. We call him the first independent Tsar because in 1556, Ivan IV defeated the Mongols, defeated their Khan, and drove them out of Russia. So rather than being second in command, he is number one in command in Russia. Therefore, he is the first independent Tsar. For defeating the Mongols in 1556, the Russian people gave Ivan IV the title the Terrible. This was meant as a compliment. What the Russian people figured is that having a leader that was called the Terrible would inspire fear in other nations in Europe and make them think twice before they challenged the mighty Ivan of Russia. What they did not realize is that Ivan would definitely earn the title the Terrible. Ivan was succeeded by his son Theodore. Theodore was not the son that should have succeeded Ivan IV. What happened to his other son? Well, we'll get to that in just a little bit. Ivan IV was succeeded by his mentally retarded son Theodore. Theodore was not capable of governing Russia. He relied on, because of his mental problems and incompetencies, he relied heavily on advisors. When Theodore died heirless, Russia was plunged into a period called the Time of Troubles, a civil war from 1598 to 1613 between various boyar families. Between 1598 and 1613 in Russia, the boyars were fighting for the title of Tsar. Which family would get to rule Russia next? Well, this civil war was won by a Russian boyar family called the Romanovs. The Romanovs win the Time of Troubles, the civil war in Russia, and they will rule Russia until 1917. The last Tsar of Russia was Nicholas II. He was the last Tsar of Russia and the last Romanov leader of Russia. Of these Romanovs, the one that is most important in our time period, the 17th and 18th centuries, is Peter the Great. He reigned from 1682 to 1725. He is described as a giant, literally and figuratively, in Russian history. Literally, meaning he was 6 feet 7 inches tall. That was a good foot or more taller than most Europeans at the time. He was also figuratively a giant in Russian history in that he made giant strides for this country. He made Russia a power to be reckoned with. At this point, what I'm going to ask you to do is to take a break from the lecture and go to the website and print out the handout entitled, "What Does It Mean to Be Great? What Does It Mean to Be Terrible?" When you print out this handout, you'll see that it's actually entitled Evaluating the Legacy of Historical Figures. And what I'm asking you to do in sections 1 and 2 of this assignment is to think carefully about what the words great and terrible mean when associated with a leader. In Western Civ 1, we talk about many leaders who are given the glorious title the Great. For example, Ramses the Great, Alexander the Great, and now here in Western Civilization 2, you just heard about Peter the Great. Now, true, I didn't tell you anything about his accomplishments. That's because I want you to do this assignment. But what does it mean, first of all, to be great? What does that mean? What are the characteristics, the personality traits, the accomplishments that you would associate with a great leader? Take a couple of minutes and answer section 1. Today, I introduced to you also Ivan IV, known as the Terrible. What does it mean to be terrible? If you have completed Western Civilization 1, you'll probably remember that we didn't talk about in Western Civilization 1 any leader that was given the nickname the Terrible, and in fact, Ivan the Fourth of Russia is the only leader we'll talk about that is called the Terrible. But we have certainly talked about terrible leaders. What does it mean to be terrible? What sorts of personality traits or lack of traits would you associate with a terrible leader? What sorts of failures would you think a terrible leader is guilty of? Take a few minutes and answer sections 1 and 2 of the Evaluating the Legacy of Historical Figures handout. Then what you're going to want to do is to go on to section 3 of that handout. And what I ask you to do on that handout is to consider each item that is listed there and decide for yourself whether or not you think that item represents the accomplishment of a great leader or the failure of a terrible one. What you're going to do here is label an item that you think is evidence of greatness with a PG. You'll label an item that you think is evidence of a terrible leader with an IT. Once you have labeled each item, come back to this lecture and listen to the discussion that follows. Listening to the discussion I'm about to have with you before you complete the parts of section 1, 2, and 3 of that assignment would really be counterproductive. So take a few minutes, do sections 1, 2, and 3, and then come back to this. Great. Okay, so if you're back with me now, that means you have completed sections 1, 2, and 3 of the handout entitled Evaluating the Legacy of Historical Figures. As you looked at each item, you were to determine whether or not the item was evidence of a great leader by writing PG or evidence of a terrible leader by writing IT. You may have figured out PG stands for Peter the Great, IT for Ivan the Terrible. What I hope you did not do was go to your textbook and try to label each correctly based on what you read there, because that's not what I wanted you to do. What I wanted you to do was to really think carefully about each item and determine whether or not it was great or terrible. Because what you're going to find here is that some things that you have labeled terrible actually are the accomplishments, quote unquote, of Peter the Great. So let's see how this breaks down. For Peter the Great, you should have the following items listed as PG: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 11, 16, 17, 20, 21, 22, 23, 30, 31, 33, and 34. What I would ask you to do after this recording ends is to take a moment and look at those items and think about, are there some terrible things that Peter the Great did? I think you're going to find there certainly are. So does he deserve the title the Great, or was he a little terrible too? For Ivan the Terrible, or as evidence of terribleness, you should have selected the following items as IT: 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 13, 14, 15, 18, 19, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and 32. If you take a moment and review those items, I think you will be convinced of Ivan IV's terribleness. I think what you gather from this assignment is that we must always approach historical figures who are given such glorious titles as the Great with a critical eye. Maybe not every leader who is